Right guys, it's coming up to Orctober, so what better thing than to try and paint some really cool orc skin. So today's video we're going to be painting this fantastic orc from Artisan Guild. And I wanted to do this one to demonstrate how I paint the green skins on this orc Blood Bowl team that I've been painting for the last couple of weeks that have been coming out looking really nice. So this is the model we're going to work on. And what we're going to do, we are heading, hopefully, to something similar to this. Right, so for painting this guy, we have got 4 colours, which are all from AK Interactive. The main colour we're going to be using is the Gunship Green. That's the colour that the model is already undercoated in, base coated in that colour. We're going to be mixing Alga Green for the main tones. We're going to be adding a little bit of yellow in at the end for some very bright highlights, and a little bit of Dragon Blood for some very deep shadows. So the progression we're going to be looking at through this piece is these colours here. Now the top 2 doesn't look a lot of difference, but there is a little bit of difference in there. The main colour is our Gunship Green here. We've got a 50-50 mix of Gunship Green and Alga Green here. This is going to be what we call our main midtone. So this is going to be the colour that's going to probably show the most. We're then going to move on to pure Alga Green for the main highlights. And then for some specular highlights at the end, we're going to add in a little bit of yellow and get some very small, brighter highlights in places. Now right at the end here, we've got a mix of the Gunship Green with a little bit of the Dragon's Blood. And this is going to be used for any really deep shadows that we want to add at the end of the painting. So without further ado, let's get on to the painting. So first up is to establish very early on, like, where is our light source coming from? And this, as I'm looking at the model, as you see it on camera now, this is the sort of light source angle. And you can see very clearly here the parts that we're going to have to highlight. You see on the head here and on this back shoulder, but mainly down this arm here. These are the areas that we're going to want that are going to be most shown in the light. Now there will be other areas that will catch light, because the light is still going to be sort of from above, more like probably here. So we're going to catch things like the tops of the chest maybe, or the tops of the fist, this part of the fist, and some of this back part. What we're going to start with is, you can see on the palette here, this mix here is a 50-50 mix of the Gunship Green and the Alga Green. So this mix here is where we're going to start. And I've mixed this up, and I've added next to no water to that. It's already liquid enough to paint with, and all we're looking for from the paint at this stage is that there's some flow on the brush. Now I always moisten my brush like I just have, so just a quick wick so it stays nice and moist, but not overly wet, but it's certainly not dry. You can see in the bristles there that there is some shine, there is definitely some moisture. So we're going to get on now with painting in the first midtone. And I'm going to block this in quite heavily. I don't worry about transitions or lines or paint showing. We're going to fix that later. So we want to focus very much here on just getting these midtones in the right place. And like I said, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit rough or whatever, we can fix that later. But right now, it's just getting the right amounts of light in the right places. So we're focusing on the main lights we're going to see. So as I said, we're blocking this in quite heavily. Now we want to leave some of this Gunship Green as a shadow color, but we want to really focus on where that light is going to show the most. So certain bits like the top of this inner shoulder muscle is certainly going to catch that bit of light, but not round the bottom and the sides of it. That is pointing away from the light. So we want to respect that and not just paint the whole of the muscle, because that's not how light works. And we're going quite big, bold highlights here, joining the muscles up where we can. So we don't want to end up with a bunch of just muscle islands where we paint just the middle parts of a muscle. As you can see here, I'm taking the paint right up to the below the edge of the muscle above it, because there wouldn't be a shadow around the top because the light is coming from there, so it would catch all of that. So we focus on, sometimes we're going to have to go several layers at times to build up opacity. We don't want this just to be a one pass and get this sort of very sort of wimpish looking color, which is not actually doing too much. So I'm painting this on, you know, I would say just a fairly normal sort of layer or base coat mixture. I've not thinned it down. So we want to get some opacity with this. So we want this color to show. Later on, through the painting process, my paint gets thinner. But that's mainly to avoid getting too heavy jumps at a later stage, and to get a better transition between when I get into the lighter colours. But for now, it's big and bold at this stage. It's like here, this muscle here, it's a big round muscle. It's got a lot of light hitting it, so we need to show that. Now, certain parts of it, like round the sides where it's moving away from the light, we don't take the paint around there. We try and respect where the light's coming from and where the fall off would be on these muscles. So as you can see here, I've not painted right up to the edge there or down below there. I left some shadow deliberately showing there. Now, like I said, I block these in quite heavily at this stage. I'm not worried about the edges of the paint or lines showing, anything like that. The most important thing here is to get all the paint, all these lights in the right place. We will sort out the refinement later on. All right then, so there is the midtone all applied. So I've gone all over this. Some places needed 2 coats, others seem to cover quite well on their own, but what you can see here is after the first midtone, we've got these harsh transitions. As you can see, in a lot of places, there's quite hard lines where this midtone is sort of being painted over the shadow color, and it's leaving quite a hard line. So the way I deal with this now, as you can see on the top of the head here, it's quite prevalent. So on my palette, what I've actually done now is that mix we just used, which was a 50-50 between the gunship green and the alga green. I've added maybe 10-20% more of the gunship green into that mix, and now we've got this in-between tone. And we are going to use that to try and bridge the gap between these 2 colours. Now, the one thing I can say about this is it's thinned down a little bit more, not a lot, but what we need to do is make sure we don't have too much paint on the brush here. Again, I moisten the brush, just gentle wicking it off so it stays moist. But we're going to be looking to just paint the line between those 2 colours now. And we want to try and just go over and over it as long as it takes, however many passes we need to take. And we want to be very careful just to filter that line. So we can use some stippling if we want to, or we can just go back and forth. Doesn't really matter whether you go light to dark, dark to light here. So it depends on where you can get your brush in and the angle that you're painting. But what I would say is I do try most of the time, it's not always possible, to use the side of my brush. Sometimes it's impossible to get that on certain places. But as you can see here on this bottom of this muscle, we're getting a nice little blend now. That's getting quite smooth. And we've been pretty lucky there, but sometimes you'll find that you can start with what you think is the right colour and it doesn't quite work, so you may have to add more of either the lighter or the darker colour to get the blend to work. This time I think we've been pretty lucky. The colour looks about right to me. But we can always do further blends, like if we feel like the dark side of the blend still looks a bit harsh, we can always add a little bit more of the dark side of the colour and blend again for that part. But this is just a process, a bit of a patience thing of just going over this, because this is what establishes the whole paint job for me, is when we get this mid-tone right and in the right place and nicely blended, the rest is a lot easier then. Like adding the highlights, all the blending, that actually becomes the easier part, because if all the light's in the right place, it's almost colour by numbers after that. So I always spend most time on a paint job, especially if I'm doing some skin like this, is that last step, the mid-tone. I try to make sure I get that, you know, as good as I can get it. And I will quite often go back and forth with go back to the base colour and sort of change bits if I need to, and then add more of the mid-tone if I need to. But once I know I get this right, then I know the rest of the paint job is a lot easier, because I've now got all my lights in the right place. And like I said, a lot of it then is colour by numbers, because you've already defined where these light spots are. The blending is now done. So as you can see now, the transition between the base coat and this mid-tone is now a lot smoother. Now, I don't try to get this 100%. It's like on the back of the head, it's still not perfect, but for the moment, this is all I need to do at the moment, because we'll do some glazing and some stuff later, which will fix a lot of those things. But for now, as you can see, we've still got all our lights exactly where we want them, and they're nicely blended in. And where the light is being lost at the lower back part of the model, you see we're retaining a lot of the shadow parts. The body as well, you can see where the shadow is, and you can clearly see where the highlighted areas are. So it's now time to move on to the main highlight. And for that, on the palette here, we've got this alga green, which was the colour we used to mix with the gunship green to make the mid-tone. Now we're going to use it in its pure state for the main highlight. And again, we now want to start picking out little areas where we want the most shine and reflection on this skin. So we're not going to paint all of these big muscles this time. We're just going to paint areas where we think there would be a brighter patch of light, or some reflection, or a little bit of shine from wherever the light's coming from. And again, this mix is not particularly thin. It's just got nice flow to it, but it's not got a lot of water in it. So when I'm painting this, I'm seeing that here, there's going to be this big patch of light. So I want to emphasize that with this layer of paint. And the same with top of the biceps here. You're going to get a nice little reflection here. And again, I'm not worrying about painting this ultra smooth, because we're going to blend it again. but we just want to make sure we get these lights in the right place. A lot of people would call this maybe the sketch and refine approach, which is fine. But the key to this approach to me is really focusing on getting things in the right place. Because you can paint something as smooth as you like and as clean as you like, but if the lights are in the wrong place, then it's just not going to read correctly. So when I look at that now, I always take a little bit of time to look and think, yeah, that looks good. That's looking good to me. We may add a little bit more light in certain areas. Like on this muscle here, we might want a little bit. Just there. And because this paint is not the best of opacity, we sometimes have to go on with a couple of layers to get the required sort of depth of colour that we need. So the little muscles down here, the bicep here, that's going to pick up a little bit of light, but it's tailing away here, so it's going to lose its reflections and lights as it moves under that body or away from the light. So that's all we're focusing on with each part we paint here, is just not trying to paint everything as smooth as possible, just concentrating very much on getting the light where it needs to be. And you can either, a lot of people will take a picture of their miniature when they first undercoat it with black or whatever, and then do that picture under a light so that you've got a constant reference of where your light is. The way I do it, I tend to keep looking at the miniature like this, of the angle of the light. So this is roughly my angle of light, and I look at it and think, is that satisfying my eye? Is my eye telling me that that is correct? And if it is, then I carry on. Now that all the highlights are in place, you can see here now that we've got much smaller, brighter areas on the model. But just like the mid-tone area, they're quite sort of blocky and not very well refined. So we need to do exactly the same as we did in the first step now, whereas I'm going to mix an in-between mix, and then we're going to go in and we're going to blend all those edges out and just soften them into the mid-tone. I've taken the alga green here and I've mixed it in with a bit of this previous colour, which was the 50-50 mix of gunship green and alga green. Now we've got this in-between tone which we're going to use to blend in those highlights. And we're going to do it very much the same. It's about the same sort of dilution on the paint. It's not overly thin, but it's certainly not too thick. So we can get a nice smooth coat of paint that we're going to put in between these layers. And I tend to just try and concentrate sort of 50-50 on the edge. And I do go both ways a lot of the time. I drag it into the colour and then away from the colour, depending on the angle that I'm at and where I can get to. And there'll be a bit of back and forth here. So if I find the colour is not blending too well, I won't be afraid to go back and say, okay, I need a little bit more of this colour or a little bit less of this colour, and we can adjust it. And just like before, I'm not focusing too much on 100% of a clean blend here, because I know we're going to come in with some glazes later, and that will be the magic bullet which will fix everything. But the less we have to fix, the easier it's going to be when we're glazing. The glazes can only do so much. and if there's a very hard transition there, it would take an awful lot of glazes to smooth it out. But if there's only a little bit of a transition there, then the glazes will fix it quite easily. So for me, this is what I'm looking to do here, is to get it sort of 80–90% of the way, and then I'll come back in and just refine it further with some glazes at the end. As you can see here, like blending this bit, it's not perfect, but it's softer than it was, and that's all we're looking for. So I'll finish that up and then we'll come back in for the final highlight in just a second. Right, so now everything is blended, and you can see we've still got this really nice light, but we just need some little bright lights now to finish that skin off. So on the palette here, I've mixed in my Elgar green with a little bit of the yellow here. So we've got this slightly brighter mix. So now we're going to try and add those little specular highlights. And again, we don't want to overdo this. We want to try and keep this to places where we think that brightest light is going to be. But we are really wanting some very small bright highlights. And I won't paint all over the model with this. So there's certain areas that I think just wouldn't get that level of intensity of light. And this paint is a little bit thinner. I do tend to work in a way that the brighter the highlights, the thinner the paint gets. So I want to avoid at this stage having too many harsh transitions. So we just build this up with sort of thinner, lighter layers. And like I say, a lot of this can be done with a little bit of stippling so that we avoid too many harsh lines. And a lot of these are going to be concentrated to very much the front facing part of the model, or the upper parts where most of the light is going to hit. Now, before we get to the final glazing part, as you can see here, I've done all those specular highlights now, only where I think they're needed. So what I'm going to do is, on the palette here, I've taken some of the gunship green, and I've added it with a little bit of the dragon's blood, and we've got this quite dark greyish mix now. And what we're going to do here is we're going to paint in the deepest, darkest shadows. Now, these are a bit like those specular highlights that we don't want to overdo this, and we're going to try and determine this by only the places that would absolutely reach zero light and be very, very dark, that we want to add some of this in. So we don't want to paint it on every piece of shadow, but we do want to get it into some places where we think might need a little bit more of a darker area. So under this muscle here is where it will be turning into a very dark area, but this part here is still quite in light, so we won't be painting that dark shadow in there. Now, it's important especially when we're trying to paint volumetrically, that we respect where the deep shadows and the ultimate brightest highlights are, because they won't be all over the model. This is somewhere where people do get it wrong quite a lot, and that sometimes makes a paint job not quite look its best, because it's shadowed and highlighted the same all over the model. And that is not how it would really work. You know, you would get different levels of shadow and highlights all over the model. So it wouldn't all be equal, if you know what I mean. So like here, for instance, you know, we've definitely got areas here that are a long way away from the light and would get sort of zero light in this area. So we're going to add a little bit more depth and darkness, just so that we can try and get a more realistic look to this skin. So parts like here would get very little light with our light source coming from the front, as would under the arm here. And that's sort of one of the keys to painting miniatures like this, is constantly thinking about where your light source is and how much light would actually affect that area. You know, we have areas on this model that would be very, very dark, but there's other areas, like we've shown from that front view, that would be very, very light. So that's what we want to try and do. We want to try and simulate with paint what the light would actually be doing to our areas, to our model. And like I say, we really only want to pick out the very deepest shadow areas, and they're not all going to be equal all over the model. So now we've got all those shadow areas in. The last step here is to just try and maybe homogenize some of these colors just a touch. And certainly from these specular lights, they're a little bit maybe too bright, too stark in areas. So what I've got on the palette here is I've taken our alga green, taken it off to the side, and I've mixed up a glaze. And what we're going to do is take most of the paint off the brush, and we want to get it to sort of this sort of consistency. As you can see, there's a little bit of paint, but not an awful lot. And we want to wick most of the paint off the brush so it doesn't pool and cause problems on our paintwork. So what I tend to do here is I'm just going to wet my brush first, wick it off, pick up some paint so the brush is moist, and then I wick most of the paint off. And all we want to do is lightly brush this very thin mix over those areas. You know, don't be afraid to go, I tend to push from the shadows into the highlighted areas. I don't want it pooling in the shadows. And this will just give that final little bit of, like I said, homogenizing these colors, bringing them close together, because we're using very much a sort of mid-tone or highlight, not too light or not too dark. If we go too dark, we're going to lose a lot of the color. But we want to try and just bring those colors together just a little bit, and to add that little smoothing effect that we get with very thin glazes. If you ever wonder why when you see really good paint jobs that they look very matte, very flat, this is one of the reasons. Like putting lots of thin glazes will matte everything down and make it very sort of smooth. It was always a mystery to me when I was getting into miniature painting of how does everyone make everything look so smooth? And that was a lot of the reason. Just very thin glazes all over. And we're not actually affecting really the highlights and the shadows too much. We're just pulling everything together and giving that all over smoothing effect. And this will work everything from the mid-tone, the shadows and the highlights. So there we go, there is the finished skin. Now I ended up giving about 3 passes with that very thin glaze, and it's smoothed it out really nicely. So as you can see, we've got really good definition in those muscles. We've not really got any muscle islands. There is a sense of connection between all the muscles and all the groups, and we've got the main highlights where we need them, which is this view that we're going to have of the model. As you can see, if we look from a different view, the highlighting and the shadows represent the view we're trying to get with the light. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, guys. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this, or more specific techniques, or painting whole miniatures. Just let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching, guys, and see you soon with another Brushmaster video.